Yeah, Mark, it shows your screen is green, but there's no sound coming out.
Are you able to hear me, Paula?
Yes, I can hear you, Karen.
Okay, great.
I can switch over to another mic. Can you hear me on this one?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Like
we can hear you.
Okay, make sure I can get you. Go ahead and speak again, Karen.
Okay, we're ready, Mark, I think.
Still trying to make sure I can pick up sound. Okay, Karen, you ready to go?
I'm ready, Mark.
Okay, let's go ahead and dive in here. I'm trying to make sure I got my sound system up and going. Sorry, you know how this technology stuff works.
All right. I think you kick it off.
Okay, I'm making sure I can hear you well. Go ahead and say 1, 2, 3 for me, Karen.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, I think we're good. So we got a thumbs up, Karen. You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, let's go ahead and jump in. So we are thrilled to welcome folks here to this conversation around a new possible. And Karen, this is just a chance to allow folks to listen in after a full couple of days of causing good trouble across the ATD and think about the leadership needs we have to really think about and kind of reimagine the road ahead in the world of education. This dialogue is intended to really think about how we come together, especially hopefully post-pandemic, as we're thinking about the months and the years ahead after this kind of shared experience, and think about how we work to develop something new. And I'll just share from our perspective at Western Governors University, as an access institution that collaborates. We have more than 500 transfer articulation agreements with community colleges around the country. We work with the College of Education that I lead is the largest college of education in the country. It has about 36,000 full-time students. We partner with about 2,600 school districts in addition to those 500 community colleges. And what we're hearing from the leaders in the space is this real kind of array of how they're approaching the road ahead. And on one side is what probably at worst I would call is kind of reactionary traditionalism, right? Which is the basic idea they want to go back to normal. And at most they want to do what they're calling a new normal, which is really kind of a bolt-on of some new technology to the way they've always done it. And on the high end are leaders who are thinking, this has to change us. We have to think differently. We've learned so much together. We've realized, in fact, a different level of empathy for our learners and kind of what the possibilities on the road ahead. And they're beginning to think about not what a new normal is, but what a new possible is, kind of the Hans Rosling idea of kind of what is possible in that kind of work. Let's just kick off the conversation. As you kind of drive the work of ATD and people are thinking about this kind of build out of a new possible, what are the kind of things you're hearing around this?
Well, you know, I think ATD colleges have been designing the new possible even before the pandemic in a lot of ways. And I think ATD colleges right now are better positioned than most to continue designing the new possible, the next norm, if we want to call it that. You know, I think one of the big challenges in higher ed and in community colleges is this idea that we do have to have agility as organizations. And the higher ed and agility, those two terms don't traditionally go together. Yeah. The cultures are not always compatible. But I think a lot of the capacity building and the work that we do with our ATD colleges is helping to build a deeper culture of agility and the ability to react when necessary, but to also be in a position to anticipate as is required in our communities. I like to think of our ATD leaders as having this panoramic view of their communities. So if you think about that panoramic view, they have the ability to see the wide lens in the panoramic view, but also go into the local context and therefore see the local context within the context of this larger vision. That's a shift. That's a shift I see. And I see that I think COVID has forced shift. Those of you that listened to the plenary earlier today heard Dr. Spriggs talk about that with great fluency. She could describe her community in a way that I have not heard a lot of college presidents able to do, and then translate that into this larger vision about what's possible for her college in her community, which gets to this idea that she can eradicate, or her college can eradicate poverty. So she really, I mean, I think she built a really amazing case today in that plenary about what the new possible could look like for community colleges.
Yeah, and I think, I think Janet Spriggs in particular, the folks who have that deep domain, they understand their context, and they're now thinking about the tools and technologies that are at their disposal. And one of the real challenges is, I think some people, because of the pandemic, causing this lurch towards like emergency remote learning, right? That there's been this real conflation problem where people have kind of conflated emergency remote learning with the really high quality digital learning that has been kind of developed over the last 20 years. And that's kind of like equating, an emergency life raft with a luxury liner. They both float, but they're very different experiences. So it comes to this idea of really getting intentional about designing the student learning experience kind of going forward. And that kind of work means we have to look at the mode, which is on ground, online, hybrid, whatever it might be the model, whether it's competency based, whether it's accelerated 8 weeks, full 16-week, whatever it is, and then thinking about the supports. That's going to be some new muscles, I think, for leaders, because it's not running the same playbook. ATD's been trying to change the playbook for a long time, but this is even going to another level. So we've been real advocates of the notion of design thinking in this work. We think because of that grounding and empathy, it's pretty game changing. And I know you and I are both fans of the book Range, which is, talks about this idea of, combining data science domain expertise together with design thinking. Talk about the importance of design thinking and why developing those kinds of disciplines in our leaders are going to matter.
Yeah, well, first I want to go back to that framework that you started to move toward, because I think that's important for people listening in. And we've had this conversation before about these three areas that, and in some ways they build on the capacities that ATD helps our colleges build, but they're at a larger macro level. So the idea that leaders need to understand data, the data science piece, and then the design thinking piece, and then domain expertise. So those keys, and then how they overlap is really, really important. And I think I might want to start with the data piece, just because I think our colleges are doing really good work with building data capacity, but there are so many new hunches that we have to build new data strategies to try to validate. And when you started to talk about the different modes of delivery, Mark, I was thinking about this morning in a meeting with the Tennessee colleges, and they were showing the different modes of delivery over the last 2 years across their entire system. And the enrollment drops or not based on those modes. But we were not able to get in that particular session into the disaggregated data around those modes, right? And so then you begin to, and not just around the students and understanding the students, but around the faculty that are teaching in those modes. And then what type of development, faculty development and investments is the college making? And does the college even have a strategy about what it wants to do with those deliveries? So trying to use the data to get to the problem to be solved, or maybe it's not a problem, maybe it's more like the dilemma, because as Range says, we're in a wicked environment. We're not solving kind problems, we're solving wicked dilemmas.
And one of the things he says pretty clearly in that book is wicked domains like education and health you can't take simplistic data strategies towards. You need that domain expertise with it. I love that notion. He talks about the dragonfly eyes, right? Where you have to have lots of different lenses, right? You might look at it with an equity lens, with a basic needs lens, with a mental health lens. And, you know, we've been embracing, Suzanne Walsh, who I know you had as one of your speakers. She and I have been really championing this idea of healthy learning, which is this kind of coming together of DEI, SEL, basic needs, mental health, and even character ethics and thriving. And the idea of trying to create these healthy environments, which means different lenses to look at the data to say, hey, this is what's happening with this is what's happening with that. So for example, during the pandemic, we actually found out there was a whole group of learners who suddenly started taking advantage of faculty office hours because they were digital, because they didn't have to drive to campus and be there live. They could actually do, you suddenly had this whole open door. So suddenly your supports by using that mode helped a whole different kind of student. And just like there's more remote working, there's probably going to be different kinds of remote learning. It just means for our design challenges, thinking about for whom does it work? Not thinking about just one size fits all, but for this kind of population, it works in this way, for this and others. And some it's about getting out of their way, others it's about providing the right support at the right time, right?
Exactly. And just to go a little deeper on the data, it requires colleges not to look just at their internal data, but the community data. And that's what we really are trying to support our colleges in with this new arc of work that ATD introduced in the opening plenary. And more counties and states are really beginning to dig into their own community vitality data. And community colleges have a big role to play in helping to fill that gap.
And that data strategy is going to be even more important because those data can actually shape which programs you offer, which micro-credentials you're going to offer, who are, you know, again, transfer partners like WGU and others, like, and what are the different professional trajectories for those folks? And then it also allows you to look at what happens to your learners after they leave your caring arms, right? So what happens to them when they go to the transfer institution? What happens to them when they go to the workplace? And because that whole data stream is going to help us think even more about how we make that education environment rich in our world. What's interesting in this is this idea of building that capacity for the rising leaders to make sure that they're grounded in access, success, and equity, but they're also grounded in the variety of learning modalities and support modalities are there. They're incredibly well grounded in data. Like, how do you use data? Like, sometimes you're using data for research, sometimes you're using it for reporting, but sometimes you're using it for just-in-time care. And those are different things, right?
They are, and there are different levels of the use. So, you know, in a lot of the leadership development work that I'm involved in, we're helping leaders to use the data to create a compelling case for the why. And then to understand that in developing that case using that data, different audiences are going to react differently to different messages and craft those messages in varying ways. And I think that's something that it's interesting to me that is such an important part of the leadership development for rising presidents and presidents that we're engaged in. So it's not just that, and we have lots of data, we're data rich institutions, but we are lacking the ability to synthesize, make the case. And that's just, it's a pervasive gap, I think, in leadership development programs.
It's amazing you're saying. We're actually working right now. We'll be rolling out probably later this year a master's in higher ed leadership. And in that program, we're specifically building data capacity. We're trying to build financial capacity grounded in the access, success, and equity work. But that whole notion of, do you understand how to leverage data? And then can you lean into design thinking and really think about how you're going to drive forward? And, you know, just related to that, I think next month we've taken our instructional design degree and our ed tech degree, and we've mashed it up, and we're going to be creating a master's of science in learning experience design. And that learning experience design program, Kim Round, who's just this amazing design chair, is just the idea of the learning designers of the future are going to have to combine. And Karen, this is where I'd love to get your take on this. We have to combine all the design work we've done on holistic student supports with the notion of holistic student experience in the learning side. So how do we bring all that into the learning and create learning experience designers? That's going to be a big part of kind of the road going forward, is really taking all that great work around the student journey ATD has done and others, and like take it the final, almost the final mile. Like, let's get into the learning experience design, because we've learned so much during the pandemic about how that kind of empathy and connection can actually make a difference.
Well, I think that you really hit on something, and I think that what you hit on is coming up a lot in the convening this week. There's been a thread of conversation started with our Dream Scholars, but continued through some of the programming around sense of belonging. And you really can't take sense of belonging and only do sense of belonging in the classroom and work on pedagogy around sense of belonging without also braiding that whole idea of care or sense of belonging throughout the entire student journey. You know, one of the things that I'm really proud of that ATD has is it's a design thinking playbook that puts the student experience in the center, and then, you know, helps colleges walk through the steps using design thinking to design with certain student persona in the middle of the student experience, and to do that design work in a very inclusive, facilitated way. So we're seeing more and more of our colleges want to move, you know, in that direction. But, you know, with design thinking, the best design thinkers know that there's really no best way. That's the dilemma here.
Yeah.
1,200 community colleges in 1,200 different communities, and they're all going to need to go through their own design thinking process in order to design that student experience that you just talked about.
Yeah, and that means they have to know their data, they have to do their design work, and then kind of roll out the supports and strategies that make the most sense in their context. And that means some deep domain experience, kind of understanding how that's going to drive forward. It is a call for, you know, kind of learners and leaders, right, in our space. But as we're kind of working to build the capacities of our teams, I'm hearing it more and more from presidents around the country, and even superintendents that we're working with, that they are trying to build in their teams this ability to not just run the old playbook, but to actually stop, take a deep breath, and learn from the last 2 years. Like, understand, like, you know, what did we do differently? How did we push ourselves? How did we think? And then what do we want to bring forward? Like, what from this did we do, including not just what we did, but the way we did it, in terms of getting really clear about scenarios, understanding personas, reaching with real clear empathy about how we use all the tools and techniques at our disposal. It's just amazing. I mean, think about 2 years ago, how many of us were actually using these kinds of digital video platforms maybe once a week, and now it's, you know, daily, right? In terms of just how comfortable we've become with these kinds of things. And it doesn't mean all or nothing. It means thinking about how do you use all these tools, because we have so many working learners. I mean, that's going to be one of the keys, is like community colleges in particular. I know WGU is deep into this, is the working learner is a distinct kind of student, and understanding that there are different kinds of working learners. They're working sustenance jobs, they're working to advance their careers. So figuring out how you reach them and teach them becomes something different. I'd love to ask you this kind of core question. As the leaders you're talking to are thinking about this larger work, and they're kind of taking what they've been doing with ATD and then thinking about the road ahead, how much do you think they're really contemplating the kind of path of professional development for their leaders? Because we have been through a shared experience, but now it's like, how do we reflect on what happened, slow down, build a plan, and then think about how we build out the leadership kind of going forward? Is that a conversation that's happening?
Absolutely, and it's happening in different ways. I mean, I just finished about 35 calls with the ATD college presidents, and not every one of them talked about the talent within their organizations and the need to build and develop. And I'll say talent, but that talent then includes new thinking about professional learning for faculty. And we're seeing that take off across our network. And we're offering a lot of supports for our colleges around professional learning for faculty. You see that in this notion that there needs to be an internal kind of leadership academy, and you know, we've both been involved in many of these in our career, but there's so many vacancies at our colleges right now, and it is so hard for most of the presidents I'm talking to are really struggling with filling positions. So they're looking internal, and they need to look internal sometimes 2 or 3 deep in their organizations, laterally in their organizations, and then they need a mechanism for professional development for their employees. I mean, I'm seeing this as being a major issue for our colleges.
And it's fascinating because we've always we've understood, I mean, ATD was one of the earliest to say, hey, college is not just a collection of classes. College is a family of experiences that help a student achieve, basically achieve their dreams, right? Get on a pathway to changing their lives. And this notion of holistic student supports to get them there. And that is at core, a human development business, right? It is a human development business. And guess what we're doing now with our teams? Like, we have to think about that way with our teams as we are taking them from the day they're coming into the point we're developing them, right?
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of other things, the conversation, my head's going in multiple directions. I do think the book by Adam Grant.
Oh yeah, Think Again.
Which really Think Again, which challenges you to unlearn, is really an important book for aspiring leaders, faculty. I mean, it's really a good book. When you talked about the recovery from COVID, or how are we capturing what we're learning from the new things that we've tried in COVID? Our coaches have worked with our colleges to help them capture the changes that they've made as a result of COVID. And we have a COVID data guide, discovery guide, to help the colleges to say, okay, we did this appears to have worked and we should keep it. We did this, it's not working, we're not going to keep it. And helping colleges have that muscle, that habit of constant reflection in the middle of a crisis is really, really hard. And I do have to credit our coaches and the ATD team for helping our colleges to stay focused on that.
Yeah.
What we don't know, though, is how the federal dollars that are coming to our colleges that are being used in many ways for students, for technology, et cetera, how they are really influencing our recovery. And I think that's an area of untapped research that would help our colleges to build a case for continued investment of significant dollars to help our students.
Yeah, it is a moment for learners. It's a moment for learners, and it's a moment for leaders, right? For us to kind of learn together what we did and what worked and what didn't, and then figure out how we're going to architect that kind of going forward. Paula, I want to make sure we take time to answer any questions that are coming in the chat.
I have, there's just a lot of comments about your conversation. I have not seen, sorry, I have a fly flying around. I saw one question early on. Let me scroll back to that, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat.
I'll give you guys a minute. I'll give you guys a minute to do that, because I have Karen here. I want to get her going on this conversation. So like this whole notion of learning experience design, I think, is something that's catching hold, where people are saying, what are the family of experiences? And you can take that great holistic advising work you've done into the learning enterprise, which is going to help faculty kind of adopt it. The challenge in this is where I'd love to get your take. This empathy work and design work is difficult, and you do have to challenge your assumptions. And if like the S-curve theory, the beginning is hard, and then it kind of takes off and it gets exciting, and then you kind of master. The challenge here is we've kind of been through a shared trauma for the last 2 years. Teams are worn out. I mean, our faculty and staff, we have 900 faculty in our teachers college, and they're exhausted working with the students we've been working with over the last 2 years to help them, kind of deal with all the challenges they've been dealing with in their classrooms and beyond. How are you hearing presidents talk about this idea of how we kind of get people excited and interested in building out for the future, but at the same time, kind of taking that deep breath, thinking about the self-care notion and kind of the idea of how we're going to come together around this moment? I'm thinking there's some power in that collective goal, but at the same time, this has been a tough 2 years, right?
I think that the presidents are all over the place in how much capacity they have to think that way, Mark. Honestly, some are further ahead than others. The presidents that I see as being further ahead are really spending a lot more time, maybe than ever, with their leadership teams.
Yeah.
Because they realize that right at this moment, it is absolutely essential that the leadership team comes together and is aligned around common purpose, that there are really strong habits of collaboration and alignment, and that the implementation of that, those goals is really in sync, because right now, anything that's not in sync and spreads is creating more
friction,
more fatigue and more friction for their campuses. And then they're trying to take, if they can get that kind of synchronization with their leadership teams, they're then trying to skip down to their deans and to do the same kind of work on synchronization with their deans, so that the department chairs, however the college is structured, they're also spending a lot of time on the faculty development, professional learning communities and different communities of practice for faculty. So that's how you see that ripple happening. But honestly, the presidents are struggling in some cases with what does the form of work look like on a community college campus now?
Right, for the whole remote learning challenges and
you read about the remote revolution
and the Great Resignation and the
on
Great
themselves.
Aspiration, and
So what does it look like for faculty in this blended environment? I don't think we're ever going to be going, well, this is I think the philosophy on this differs across the leaders that I've talked to. Some are all in on telecommuting and, work, creating incentives.
The blend.
Others are saying we can only serve our students if we're face-to-face. We all have to be here. And I think that's a real tension. And when you are in a competition in your communities for talent and national for talent, it is going to be really hard to not move to a more blended experience for the employees. So, I do think we need to talk more about the employee experience on our college campuses, as well as the student experience. We could apply the design thinking philosophy to the employee experience.
I think that's exactly it. I think, at our college, we've adopted this idea of we want to champion next generation teaching and leading. But to do that, our students have to experience next generation teaching and leading at our college. But that's transformative work, and it means that we have to create a transformative work environment. And that means we have to use our design thinking, not just on our modes and models and supports for our students, but we need to rethink our work, right? We need to rethink how we're doing our work. And I think, that the notion, we call it the two betters. Let's do better work in a better way. Right. And that better way part, that's something that could get people energized around kind of driving some of that conversation.
So we have a couple of questions. I have one I see from one of my favorite ATD board members, Pam Edinger, who's asking, what does presidential self-care look like? And that is a conversation that comes up a lot with the presidents. And I'm sure, I'm not the best one to answer that question, frankly, but what does faculty self-care look like? We talk, inside ATD, we talk a lot about creating spaciousness. And the dilemma, and I know that the dilemma with creating spaciousness, while we know that that's really important for mental health and motivation and even leads to stronger collaboration and better implementation, and finding spaciousness when you are in an environment like we're in is really, really hard. Organizational spaciousness as well as individual spaciousness. So I do try individually to do something I call white day planning, where I that means there's nothing on my calendar. Nothing on my calendar. That's something Jim Collins has said is but I always violate my rules and populate that day with meetings. So it's not, while I feel really good when I'm getting my planner out and doing that, it's not really working. I think organizations could create, and we've tried to do this at ATD, but not with a lot of success, could block out parts of the calendar for organizational self-care.
Yeah, and that's where the that classic line in SEL training is that music is wonderful because of the space between the notes, right? It's creating space for some of that rhythm. And you and I know a dear friend who passed in the last year who was an amazing model of that, Dr. Steve Middlestat, who was the president of Richland College. And his core belief, they were the first community college to win the Baldrige. They were, way ahead of the game in using data and kind of driving student journeys. But and it was funny because they were hard data, but like talk about a college that took formation and the Parker Palmer stuff really seriously. But his core belief was you lead from the inside out. You have to be doing self-work, and then you can do teamwork, and then you can do college work, and then you can impact your community, but you got to do that from the inside out.
Well, that's one of the 3 Ds on domain expertise. That's where that has to begin. It has to begin with knowing yourself. I mean, Sandy Shugart always talks about the knowing yourself. The biggest role for a leader is to explore their interior self.
Yep.
And to have a regular practice and habit to do that. And I think that's what, right now, all of us need to find that practice to do that. There is a question in the chat that's interesting, and it has come up in some of my conversations with presidents, and it's on the half-empty facilities that we have and how we're going to think of new possibilities for those facilities. And many college presidents are talking about facilities plans that look a lot different than any facilities plans we've ever done in the past. And that include, they're getting into the real estate business in some respect. Right. Some creative use leasing, but also thinking about community partners that could come into facilities, really trying to think very creatively about what to do with facilities. And then you do see a number of our colleges. Durham Tech announced this week that they're doing affordable housing in partnership with their community. Wake Tech is doing the same thing. So they're transitioning some facilities into community-based kinds of facilities. And that gets to this whole idea that we need to be more connected to our communities, and part of the community work is around those types of partnerships.
But it also goes back to this idea of guess what? It's like we have worked through the last 2 years, but the next 2 years might be as challenging, because we're going to be living through a lot of transition culturally, a lot of transition economically, a lot of transitions educationally. So we've got to rethink how our space is being used, how our technology is being used, even our learning modalities. We've had so many people reach out to us at Western Governors because they dabbled with competency-based and mastery-based and or gradeless education. And of course, we've been doing it for 20 years, and we've been working with them because we're glad to tell them everything we know about this whole idea of kind of, can you do it different? Because what they found is that grades sometimes feel like you end up in a cycle of blame and shame with some students, which is tough for a lot of first-generation low-income students. Whereas that competency-based model kind of lets you play in the grace and challenge model, where it's like, yeah, you might not have got it the first time, but let's kind of go back at it and kind of challenge yourself to rise up, and then you reach to a certain threshold. I'm only throwing that out because these are the kinds of things, like we just talked last week with the Mastery Transcript Consortium. So if you go to mastery.org, 400 public schools that are working with universities to create a transcript based on mastery, not grades. And the whole idea is to unlock that and to break that cycle, right? Those are the kind of changes that we as leaders have to get our heads around, because as that stuff starts, it's just our facilities, our technology, and the rest. There's going to be a lot of change in the coming years. So we've got to get our leaders ready, right?
Looking through the chat, Paula, any other questions we can take on?
Just to let you know, this will end automatically in about 5 minutes, but we do have
that's good.
A great conversation going.
That's called unplugging. I saw someone put in there, we need to unplug. That's called unplugging. So that's good.
Yeah, well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Karen. And Karen, I'd love any kind of final admonitions for the folks here as we're thinking about this? Again, the idea is we have to be willing to take a beat and think about how we vision, not just go back to normal, but really build out a new possible. And you're definitely doing that all day, every day at ATD, right? And it's thinking about how the big thing I'd love for you to reflect on is just how important it is for us to think about building our leadership capacity for this. It's why we're investing in our programs and why you're investing in your programs. It's like, this is going to be a thing.
Well, we're already, we're seeing the movement of the thing around leadership development. So Western Governors University's programs, ATD's partnering with University of Maryland Global Campus on the redesign of their doctoral program. We're really deep partners with the Belk Center at NC State with we feel that we have a lot to add to the curriculum as it's being developed, because we do have this practice-based idea about what leadership can look like. We're also very closely aligned with the Aspen Institute and both of their leadership programs. What I see missing, and this is, I know that there are master's degree programs that are helping with this leadership development, and you're going to fill the new programs you're offering.
And by the way, we don't do doctorates, so we're
right. So you're doing the master's, which is really important for people to know as they're thinking about how they're going to ladder their own professional development. But this idea, and this came up last night in our meeting with the presidents, that we need to do more for the middle part of our organizations. The deans and the department chairs especially, and faculty, that we really need to build stronger programs to support.
And think about that advising layer we just hired in like crazy over the last 9 years.
And the advisors, that the student affairs professionals. And how does that connect with the work we're doing with faculty, because it needs to be braided. There's a book that I'm reading right now about leadership, and it's a couple of years old. Bob Johansson is and he talks about this thing that I think is really important for everyone in the community college world to hold, this competency, and he calls it the maker instinct. So if you think about the maker spaces,
I get it.
Campuses, right? And what we're trying to help students do in those maker spaces, we have to turn that on ourselves as professionals. And having a maker instinct is this instinct about how to make and remake your work, and having that passion to remake. I used to talk to presidents and say, hey, after about 5 to 7 years, if you want to stay fresh, you have to reinvent yourself. You have to remake yourself. So it's not just your organizations, it's remaking who you are.
I love it. I love it. And we are going to be out of time, and I'm going to let that be the last word. This is going to be about remaking the road ahead, and we're going to be doing that together. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Karen, for taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Have a great evening. I see so many faces as you're going away that I recognize. Thanks for being here, everyone. Bye. Oh, I see people wait. I see Larry. Hi, Larry. Hi, Paula Pando. How are you? Send it back to you as well.